The winter of 1952 carried a sharp wind through the hills of Derbyshire as the Cartwright family approached their new home. Greystone Hall stood upon a rise of land, its grey stone walls towering against the pale sky, windows dark and watchful like eyes that had seen too much. Arthur Cartwright, a barrister from London, had purchased the estate at a surprisingly modest price. His wife Margaret admired the sweeping grounds from the carriage drive, her gloved hands resting tightly on her lap. Their eldest daughter, Lydia, stared up at the house with wide eyes, sensing at once that Greystone Hall was not an ordinary place. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of age, timber, dust, and forgotten memories. The great hall rose with its carved beams, the echo of footsteps bouncing off the stone. Yet it was the drawing room that held their attention. Upon the far wall hung a portrait. A young woman, draped in ivory silk, her skin pale as candle wax, her eyes an unsettling grey blue. She was beautiful, but there was something in the set of her mouth that suggested sorrow too deep to name. "The last of the Fairfaxes," said the caretaker, an elderly man named Mr. Hewson who had remained to oversee the handover. "That is Miss Eleanor. She vanished in this very house, almost a century ago." Lydia stepped closer, drawn irresistibly to the painted eyes. For a moment, she felt them flicker with a light not belonging to paint or canvas, but to life. Her breath caught in her throat. And though no one else seemed to hear it, Lydia was certain that a faint whisper brushed her ear, soft, urgent, and cold as the winter wind. The first night at Greystone Hall was colder than expected. Though great fires burned in the hearths, the draughts crept through cracks in the stone, sighing through the corridors like unseen visitors. Lydia lay awake in her chamber, the heavy curtains drawn tight against the moonlight. Yet sleep would not come. The silence of the house was not truly silent. It was filled with small, disquieting sounds, the creak of old beams, the faint scratch upon a wall, and above all, the whisper she had heard earlier in the drawing room. She turned over restlessly, pressing the pillow against her ears, when it came again. A voice, almost indistinguishable, murmuring close beside her. "Lydia." Her heart pounded. She sat upright, the candle on her bedside table flickering as though stirred by breath. The room was empty, yet her name had been spoken with chilling clarity. Summoning her courage, Lydia slid from the bed and padded across the cold floor. She pushed open the door and stepped into the passage, where shadows stretched long beneath the faint glow of gas lamps. At the end of the corridor, she saw it, the faint glimmer of white silk, like the hem of a gown disappearing around a corner. "Mother," Lydia whispered, though she knew it was not Margaret. Barefoot, she followed, her pulse racing with every step. The sound of her breathing echoed too loudly, and the silence beyond grew heavier, as if the house itself were listening. The figure led her down the staircase, past the long gallery of ancestral portraits. Their painted eyes seemed to lean forward in the dim light, as though eager to witness what she would find. At last, Lydia reached the drawing room once more. The fire had burned low, shadows licking the walls. And there, before the great portrait of Eleanor Fairfax, stood a pale outline of a woman. The figure lifted its face, grey blue eyes glimmering with sorrow, and extended one hand toward Lydia. Then the room fell into complete darkness. When the morning sun broke through the curtains, Lydia awoke in her bed as though the night had been nothing but a dream. The fire in her hearth had burned to ash, and the room was silent once more. Yet the memory of the whisper and the figure in white haunted her mind with merciless clarity. At breakfast, she searched her parents' faces for some sign that they too had heard or seen something. But Arthur was buried in the morning paper, and Margaret fussed over the arrangement of the silverware. Lydia kept her silence, knowing they would dismiss her words as childish fancy. That afternoon, restless and unwilling to remain idle, she wandered the halls of Greystone. Dust lingered in corners, and cobwebs clung to the beams. Many rooms were locked, their keys lost long ago. It was in the east wing, down a narrow passage that smelled of mildew, that Lydia stumbled upon a curious irregularity. A panel of oak, darker than the rest, seemed loose. She pressed against it and, with a groan of old hinges, the wood gave way to reveal a hidden cavity in the wall. Inside lay a small leather-bound diary, its edges cracked with age. On the cover, the initials were faintly visible, E.F. Her hands trembled as she opened the first page. The handwriting was elegant, yet urgent. I am Eleanor Fairfax. They will not let me love him. They watch every step I take. If I cannot be free, then I must find another way. But I fear the house itself conspires to keep me here. Lydia's breath quickened. She turned another page, and another, until she found an entry that chilled her to the bone. If anyone finds these words, know that Greystone Hall holds more than walls and stone. It holds secrets. And it does not forgive. The ink beneath the final sentence trailed into a blot, as if the writer's hand had been snatched away. And then, from somewhere deep within the east wing, Lydia heard it again, the whisper, low and urgent, calling her name. That evening, Lydia could not rest until she returned to the east wing. The diary burned in her thoughts, its words echoing louder than the whispers themselves. With a candle in hand, she crept through the shadowed corridors, her steps muffled by the threadbare carpet. At the far end of the passage stood a heavy oak door, its iron lock rusted but unbroken. She had passed it earlier and dismissed it as one of many forgotten rooms. But now, with Eleanor's diary clutched against her chest, she felt drawn to it as though the house itself wooed her closer. She tried the handle. It did not move. The lock resisted her push. Yet as she leaned in, a sudden gust swept through the corridor and her candle almost died. When she steadied it again, she realized something. The faintest draft of air escaped from beneath the door, carrying with it a scent of roses long withered. Her fingers brushed the edge of the lock, and to her astonishment, it clicked open without a key. The door groaned on its hinges as she pushed it inward. The chamber was small and circular, its walls lined with faded wallpaper. A single chair sat in the center, facing an empty hearth. But what caught Lydia's gaze was the mirror. It hung above the fireplace, tall and narrow, its surface clouded by age. Yet as she stepped nearer, the candlelight revealed more than her own reflection. Behind her, in the glass, stood another figure, a young woman in ivory silk, her eyes grey-blue, her lips parted in silence. Lydia whirled round, the chamber empty. But when she turned back, the figure in the mirror remained. And this time, it lifted its hand and pressed it flat against the glass, as though begging to be let out. Lydia fled the locked chamber, her candle flickering wildly as she ran through the darkened corridors of Greystone Hall. The whisper followed her, not one voice but many, led upon each other like a dreadful chorus. By the time she reached her room, her breath came in ragged bursts and her hands shook too violently to hold the flame steady. She slept little that night, waking often from dreams of cold hands brushing her face, of doors opening without touch, of grey-blue eyes fixed upon her. When the morning came, she was pale and restless, but she resolved to return to the diary. Seated by her window, she turned the fragile pages with care. Midway through, she found an entry unlike the rest, written in hurried strokes. If the mirror shows you my face, beware. It is not only me who lingers here. Something older than I stirs in the shadows. It watches, it waits. Do not trust the house. The words unsettled her deeply. She could almost feel Eleanor's fear bleed through the ink. Later that day, as Lydia carried the diary in her arms, she descended the main staircase. The afternoon light streamed weakly through stained glass, casting red and gold across the walls. At the bottom, she noticed Mr. Hewson, the caretaker, polishing the banister with slow, deliberate strokes. Mr. Hewson, she said, hesitating. Do you know what lies in the east wing? Behind the locked chamber. The old man froze. His cloth dropped to the floor. When he turned to her, his expression was not confusion, but something closer to alarm. You must stay away from there, he said in a hoarse whisper. For your own sake, Miss Lydia. That part of the house should never have been opened. Before she could press him further, the clock in the hall struck 3, and the chime seemed to echo too long, resonating through the stones like a warning bell. That night, Lydia could not resist. Despite Mr. Hewson's warning, her curiosity gnawed at her like a persistent flame. The diary rested beneath her pillow, as though Eleanor's words whispered into her dreams. When the house had fallen into silence, Lydia rose once more, candle in hand, and made her way back to the east wing. The locked chamber awaited her, its door strangely ajar this time, as though expecting her return. The air inside was colder than before, heavy with the scent of old roses. The mirror loomed above the fireplace, tall and waiting. Lydia stepped closer, heart racing, and lifted her candle. At first, her reflection stared back, pale, wide-eyed, trembling. But then, behind her image, the figure appeared again. Eleanor. Her ivory gown shimmered faintly, and her lips moved soundlessly. Lydia leaned closer, trying to read the words. Then, in a rush of dread, she realized the reflection's lips were not forming her name, but a warning. Not alone. Before Lydia could react, another shape moved into view behind Eleanor, darker, taller, its form distorted, as though the mirror itself could barely contain it. 2 hollow eyes burned like embers, and long, shadowed fingers reached forward. The glass rippled as the thing pressed itself against it, straining to break through. The chamber groaned, the candle sputtered, and Lydia staggered backwards. The last thing she heard before fleeing was Eleanor's desperate whisper, faint but clear. "Run, before it finds you." Lydia slammed her bedroom door and pressed her back against it, her heart thundering as though it might burst. She tried to steady her breath, but the memory of that shadowed figure in the mirror clung to her like frost on glass. Sleep did not come. Instead, she sat awake until dawn, the diary open on her lap, tracing Eleanor's words with trembling fingers. By morning, the house seemed quieter than ever. Even the birdsong beyond the windows felt subdued, as if Greystone itself had smothered every sound. At breakfast, Arthur and Margaret spoke little, their voices flat, distracted. Lydia noticed her father's hands shake as he lifted his teacup. Later, determined to find answers, she returned to the library. Its tall shelves stretched high into the gloom, filled with forgotten tomes. Dust hung thick in the air. She searched for any mention of Eleanor Fairfax, the Fairfax family, or the history of the manor. At last she found it, a bound ledger tucked behind a row of law books. Inside were accounts of Greystone's affairs, lists of tenants, inventories, dates, and names written in neat columns. One entry, however, was different, penned in a hurried, uneven hand. The east wing sealed, by order of the master. None must enter. The mirror remains, unchained, but guarded. She is not alone in it. May God forgive us. The words blurred as Lydia read them, her pulse racing. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. The creak of footsteps overhead. Slow. Deliberate. Yet she knew her parents were outside in the garden, and Mr. Hewson had gone to the village. Lydia froze. The house, it seemed, was not empty. It was awake. The footsteps overhead did not fade. They grew heavier, descending slowly, each creak of the stair echoing through the silent hall. Lydia's breath caught as she clutched the diary to her chest, her candle flame trembling. She moved to the edge of the library doorway, peering out into the main corridor. The staircase stretched upward in the dim light, its banister casting long shadows. Halfway down, a figure emerged. At first, Lydia thought it was Eleanor, ivory gown trailing softly, hair coiled in delicate waves. But then, as the figure descended further, the candlelight revealed something wrong. The face was blurred, features shifting as though carved from smoke. Where the eyes should have been, only 2 hollow pits remained, glowing faintly like dying embers. Lydia stumbled back, her hand striking the doorframe. The sound made the figure pause. Its head turned sharply toward her, though no eyes were there to see. A chill swept through the hall, and the flame of her candle guttered low. The figure began moving again, faster now, gliding rather than walking, the hem of its gown whispering across the steps. Heart hammering, Lydia fled back into the library. She slammed the door and pressed her weight against it, her whole body trembling. On the other side, she could hear the slow drag of fabric against the wood, as if the figure stood there, waiting. Then, a whisper seeped through the cracks, cold and inhuman. "The house remembers. And it wants you." The library door shuddered as the thing pressed against it. Lydia clung to the handle, her body taut with fear. The diary slipped from her grasp and fell open on the floor. One sentence, scrawled across a faded page, seemed to leap out at her. "The mirror binds it. Only within the glass can it be sent back." Her breath quickened. The mirror, the chamber, Eleanor's warnings. The truth struck her at once. If she faced the shadow where it dwelled, perhaps she could trap it again. With trembling resolve, Lydia snatched up the diary and burst from the library. The corridor was empty, but the air was heavy, pulsing with a presence that stalked her unseen. She ran, her candle sputtering in the draught, until she reached the east wing once more. The chamber waited. The mirror loomed. And within its depth, Eleanor stood, her pale face filled with sorrow. "Help me," Eleanor whispered, though her lips made no sound. Behind her, the shadow rose, immense, writhing like smoke, its hollow eyes burning. It saw Lydia. It lunged. With a cry, Lydia lifted the diary and hurled it against the mirror. The glass shivered violently, light searing through the chamber. The reflection split in two, the shadow screaming soundlessly, Eleanor's figure reaching out in desperate relief. The mirror cracked. Shards fell, glittering like ice. The shadow shrieked as it was dragged inward, its form twisting, splintering, until with a final pulse of light, it was gone. Only silence remained. The chamber smelled of roses once more. In the fractured mirror, Eleanor's face lingered a moment longer. She smiled, soft and grateful, before fading like mist at dawn. Lydia fell to her knees, exhausted, the broken glass glinting around her. She knew Greystone Hall would never truly be free of its memories, but for now, the house was quiet. And in that silence, she heard one last whisper, not of warning, but of thanks.